Welcome. Welcome to the universe. Welcome to consciousness. Welcome to existence. All right. Got a fun topic today. Got a really fun topic. One that everybody seems to really be passionate about. We're bound to have some interruptions. We're bound to have some conflict of signal, all that sort of thing. It goes with the nature of a live recording that is mobile. It goes with the nature. See, if you're stable in one position, well, you're not having to jump towers. But when you're traveling 20-ish miles, 20-something miles, you're bound to jump through a couple towers. Then there's the nature of interruptions, just ones I don't have control over. Anyway, privilege, the topic of the day. Let's get to it. Let's get to it. Let's discuss an element of privilege. We're going to play a little game. That's what we're going to do. I'm going to discuss the privilege. Okay? I'm going to name the privilege. And you don't have to say anything. It's just going to happen in your brain. Okay? I'm going to name the privilege. And you're going to be thinking uncontrollably, I might add. You're not even going to be able to stop yourself from thinking. It's just going to come to your brain. I'm going to plant ideas in your brain without saying the idea. And I want you to realize, if I can do it, a novice, an amateur, so to speak, how do you think that people that are being fed millions of dollars have decades of practice, centuries of information's the wrong word, but informed practice is kind of what I mean. They have intel, centuries worth of intel that informs their practices on trying to program you. If I can do it, how much better do you think people that are well-funded and well-informed can do the same thing? Think about it, guys. Think about it. So here's the first privilege I'm going to bring to your mind, and it's going to cause you to think about a group of people, even though I'm not going to say that group of people. Okay? Here's the privilege. See how best I can present this. I want to say it in a sarcastic way, and I don't at the same time. I'm going to try to just keep it dry and objective. See if I can make it through. We'll see. We'll see what happens. All right. There is a privilege that allows a specific people group the right to call others within that same people group a word. That word is prohibited by others that do not belong to that people group. So let me repeat, just so that it's not too disjointed. It's the raw, unedited version. There's a people group that use a word. in address of others of that same people group. That same word is prohibited by others who are not part of that people group. And that is privilege. That is a privilege that they have that right over others who do not have that right. It's a privilege. What does it mean? What does it mean? Okay. Let's see. What else? What else? What else? It's a good one. It's a privilege. All right. Let's see. What about... That's... However, privilege, or is it? Is it or is it not? Is privilege associated with prejudice? In my understanding of the word privilege, privilege means that an individual, by nature of some categorical status, they have access to an action or state of being or substance that someone that does not have that category may not absolutely not, but may not have equal access to that action, substance, or state of being. So that's how I would break it down. If that's too heady, let's go read some books. I know. It's my responsibility to distill the information in such a way that even a kindergartner can understand. I understand. I get it. I see what you're saying. Get over it. I'll work on it. We can get through this together. Don't get all emotional just because you're having difficulty understanding. We will get through this. I will try and break it down in simplest terms. Okay. Here's a privilege. The first one, it's interesting. You could hypothetically be the sort of person that didn't know who I was talking about. You could, it's possible. I'm gonna try and assume that it's possible you had no idea what people group I was talking about. But here's another one. Here's a privilege. A privilege to a group of people to say words that form into statements that are perceived or could be perceived as threats. Okay, threat of harm and threat of loss of life. This is satisfactory and acceptable or justified by this specific group of people because this group of people claims to advocate for minorities. Okay, so that was the what do they call that? The draft, the rough draft. There we go. That was the rough draft version, guys. Rough draft version. There's a group of people that have a privilege to say words and say things that are most assuredly threats of loss of life. They are permitted this, and justified so, because they claim to stand for the rights and the advocacy of minorities, whomever those minorities may be. Any minority, it doesn't matter. They have the privilege of threatening harm and threatening loss of life to others by nature of advocating for a minority. It is as this: because I stand for and protect the rights of minorities, I can threaten you and I can threaten the loss of your life because I care about minorities. Let's phrase it in a different way. Because I believe, not know, because I believe that your thoughts are the majority, I, a defender of the minority, have the right to threaten you with loss of life or harm to yourself and or the members of yourself, also known as your family, or anything you may love or care about. I have the right to threaten you and the things you care about as a defender of minorities, because I believe that your thoughts belong to the majority. Here's a little irony about this privilege that, without going into too great of detail, I could very easily prove, but I hope you see it plain as day. But here's some interesting irony about this. This belief that you can just threaten the majority based on your belief that you're protecting the minorities is coming from, think this through, the people that believe this also believe in this word democracy. Guys, let's not talk about ideals necessarily. Let's just talk about pragmatics. You or the voice of the many? Are all people supposed to have equal access and voice? And in so doing, what decision is made? What most agree or what the least agree? Democracy. Democratic. If we take a survey, guys, and we take a poll, and 85%, let's say 85% agree on this thing. Let's just make up a thing real quick, just for thought exercise, guys. All right, let's do this. Let's take the sneeze. I think that this is interesting. Relatively involuntary action, the sneeze. Let's say that at least 85% of Americans, we'll just stay with America, let's say at least 85% of Americans believe that we should not be executed, meaning our lives be taken from us instantaneously or through due process, whatever, as a result of a sneeze. So let's say somebody's trying to pass a law that every person that sneezes shall be put to death on the spot. Let's just say it's ridiculous, I know. That's not the point. The point is not how ridiculous of a law this is, guys. That's not the point. The point is just distinguishing majority from minority. Okay. So let's say at least 85% agree that that's a horrible law. They're like, no, I've sneezed before. I don't want to be put to death just because I sneezed. It's involuntary. I mean, come on. So that's one opinion. However, let's say there's a small minority, let's say, I don't know, 1.3% or 0.06% or 0.6% or 3%. Doesn't matter. Let's say there's a small minority that says, listen, sneezing is akin to spreading of disease, and we ought to put all people to death instantly, and that's my opinion, so on and so on. And that's the minority view. Well, there's the question of, do they have the right to say so? Some would say yes, some would say no. It's abhorrent to the people that want to live through a sneeze and not be instantly executed. It's like, man, that's very threatening to me that you would suggest that I should die because I sneezed. I picked a harmless topic on purpose, guys. Just give me a break, okay? I know the example's not perfect. But what we're talking about here is privilege. The reason I went off on this alleged tangent, as you're saying, well, you've gotten really tangential here. Nope. It comes back full round circle, guys. As tangential as my thoughts and words may seem at times, they're connected. Let me connect it back for you if you're not seeing the connection. I pretty much already suggested. The minority, guys. Minorities have privilege by being minorities. I tell you what, that's crooked. Oh, that was a yawn. If there ever was a yawn. Minority privilege is what I'm discussing right now. Okay? My screen brightness just changed. That was unusual. Minorities have privilege. That's what I'm talking about. And they have privilege in that they have advocacy groups. They have a historicity. They have a history of oppression. Minorities have a history of oppression. Why? Guys, it's a deep topic. Very deep. Very deep. It's interesting that there is privilege provided in our society, in this century, in this decade. There's a special privilege being given to minorities. Is that helpful or not helpful? Well, let's break it down a little bit further and ask that question. Should there be minorities? Should there be individuality? Should there be uniqueness? Are all uniquenesses equal? Are other uniquenesses more equal than others? I don't know. Think about it. Think about it. The privilege of the minority. Historically, minorities have been taken advantage of. Not necessarily. Maybe. Because it has to do with power and their strength in numbers. Okay? But why would a minority group be targeted? If they are smaller in number, that in nature, mathematically, should make them less threatening. So then you have to ask, well, if a minority group ever had hatred for the majority, it was out of a nature of jealousy. Because under the perception of the minority, they perceived the majority to have privilege that they didn't have access to. And as much as that could be true, minorities have not been kept or restricted to being minority on purpose necessarily. There's different, it's like you can't conflate everything, right? There's different instances where that might have happened on purpose. But what we're talking about here, and what I'd like to draw to your mind, is the nature of the unknown. All right, so there is the nature of the unknown, and there is the nature of differentness that is either alluring or fear-invoking. So there are times when the unknown truly frightens to the core. I don't know what's going on, so I'm going to assume that it's horrible. That's the fear of the unknown, right? And then there's the alluring qualities of the unknown, where a certain group may be perceived as having access to special privileges or special power because they belong to the minority. There are certain qualities being identified that they have access to that others don't. We could have the minority of the wealthy that we've discussed before, the ultra wealthy, but money is the common denominator being discussed there. It's not some other quality. All right, so technically those in power are a minority. If you were to say, separate the two categories, those in power to make decisions that affect the lives of others, and those not in power to affect the lives of others. Obviously, those in power to affect the lives of others is a minority on our planet. However, there's not any identifiable characteristics among the people that are in power exhaustively or consistently or across the entire gambit of of those in power. Same with those in money. There might be majorities within the minority. Says I'm live again. Sorry for the interruption. Anyway, there could be majorities within within these groups of people in power or people with money. That could be incidental. I don't know. The point that I'm making here. What in the name? Point that I'm making here is that there's any number of small groups of people that join together. If people don't know what's going on, or there's a mystery involved, they could be ostracized, they could be targeted, they could be perceived as a threat. What is being threatened? That's a good question, guys. What's being threatened? So, there's a certain group of people that meet in buildings that have no windows. They have a special symbol that they put on the back of their car or on the lapel of their jacket. It's this special symbol that you see all over the place. This special symbol and this group of people are associated with another group of people that pledge allegiance to a fallen angel. Whether or not any of that's factual, the question I'm asking, whether or not it is the question, but I'm asking it, is what threat does this group pose to you? Well, the nefarious activities of this minority group, they're doing things behind closed doors that are very questionable, deemed as potentially just objectively immoral, objectively terrible. This all could be true. What threat does it pose to you? Well, hypothetically, I could have a child that grows up, and in their young adult years, they could join this group and be fooled into thinking that there's something special about it, and they're like stealing away our people and rotting their minds out with terrible ideas and engaging in these horrible practices. Well, guys, if this group that meets behind closed doors in buildings without windows and wear these special symbols, they put them on their cars, they have secret handshakes, so on and so on. Guys, if that is a threat to you, I would suggest, and don't get me wrong, stuff can be creepy, okay? That's not my point. Here's my point. If that's a threat to you, I think you might be thinking about this in the wrong way. I think you might be thinking about life in the wrong way. I think that you might be fearing the wrong thing. Okay? Guys, snakes could be scary, right? What do we do about it? Guys, alligators could be scary, right? What do we do about it? Guys, laying down in an anthill? Probably not great. Here's the thing. Do we believe in autonomy? I don't know, guys. Do you believe in autonomy? Do you believe someone has the right to lay their body down in an anthill? Do you believe that somebody has the right to let themselves be consumed by an alligator? Does somebody have the right to do that? In a lot of cases, there is this overarching belief that life should be preserved. That means the fact that that concept exists, life should be preserved, what does that indicate? Does that indicate something bad about life or good about life? Think about it. All this stuff goes together. I am currently facing on the road the building without windows, except there's like 50 windows. They're all like covered. It's an old church building that's been converted into this special building that I was referencing, that almost always have covered windows or bricked over windows. That one just had curtains. It was actually kind of different than the norm. Just saying. All right, all this stuff's related, guys. How's it related to privilege? Guys, privilege. What does privilege mean? It means that you have access to something by nature of a category that you belong to. So, is privilege inherently bad? Think about it that way. Does having access categorically I think you're getting it. I heard that. What this is about, we could break it down to access, guys. It's all about stuff. It's all about stuff. And the question is philosophical. It is. So the question is stuff, access to stuff, who has the right to stuff? That's what it's all about, guys. That's what all the political systems are about. It's what every governmental system is all about. The question of stuff. And who has right to it? Or does anybody have right to it? Privilege. Privilege is access to stuff. Stuff being what I mentioned earlier, the actions, the substances or actions or states of being. Those were the three categories I had named. So I'm going to give the parent category, I'm going to just call that stuff. And access to stuff. Who has the right to access to stuff? Well, one group of people would say that we don't have a right, we have a responsibility. That would be one group's perspective. We have a responsibility to stuff. Well, isn't that interesting? Interesting. We have a responsibility to stuff. Excuse me. And it is our responsibility to make the stuff provide for our needs. And stuff will provide for our needs if we fulfill our responsibility to make it do so. It's upper level, this concept here that I'm sharing. I know it's some upper level thinking. I get it. I do. But it is the core. It is the point. It is the essence of all of these conversations. It is possibly one of the most, not the, but one of the most important conversations we could have on the matter. On the matter of justice, on the matter of rightness, on the matter of rights, permissions, privileges. If we're going to talk about that, we're going to talk about stuff. And if we're going to talk about stuff, we're going to ask, what do we have in relation to stuff? Do we have rights to stuff? Do we have responsibilities to stuff? Do all people equally have rights to all things? Must a man destroy another man in order to get stuff? Stuff like land, stuff like food, stuff like anything. Stuff. Okay? Must a man destroy another man to get stuff? Must a man cooperate? Must a man? Think about it in those terms. Must a man cooperate with another man to get stuff? What if that man is uncooperative? What is reasonable? What is unreasonable regarding a man and stuff? Who defines what is reasonable? Who defines what is unreasonable? Let's say I have 2 acres. Let's say a man asks me for a portion of my land. Let's just say an equal portion. Let's just say. Is it unreasonable or reasonable? The request in and of itself. Is the request to have half of a man's land reasonable or unreasonable? If you're the only 2 people on the planet, obviously the conversation would not be 1 acre or 2 acres. Well, let's just say 2 people on the planet, hypothetically, obviously. Is the whole planet shared equally, or is it divided 50-50? And who gets which half? Who determines which half? Is this somehow mathematically or algorithmically divided so that all things are equal? Or is there any separateness whatsoever and they just literally own it both? Multiply that by 7.5 billion. Is it really that all people should be permitted to share all things equally? Is the ownership of things evil? Is the sharing of things wrong? Would it be immoral if the entire planet shared everything? Would it be immoral? You can't talk about privilege, guys, without talking about stuff and access to it. That is the higher subject within the subject. It's outside of the subject. That's how it's above it. It is higher. Okay? Access to stuff. So what would the planet be like if everything was equal? There was no ownership of any kind. Everything was equal access. That could be an interesting, that could be very interesting. Let's just go with cars, okay? Let's consider cars. Imagine it's hard. This is a leap that philosophically, it's beyond a leap. It's like light years different than the universe that we live in. But for a moment, just restrict your mind to only the thought of cars. So you've got a Toyota Camry and a Porsche, a Panamera, okay? You've got a BMW X5. And all ownership, there's no such thing as ownership in this imaginary example. What do I want to hop in and take away and drive to where I want to go? I'll probably not be motivated to get in the Toyota Camry. Not necessarily though, right? So let's say I'm trying to go from, I'm just pure pragmatics, guys. Just break it down pragmatically. I'm trying to go from here, from Florida to Washington or Alaska. I'm trying to drive all the way to Alaska. Well, what vehicle am I going to choose then? I'm never going to pick a Pinto, though, right? All things considered equal or the same in our reality, there are certain vehicles that I wouldn't want to drive for various reasons. For reasons of safety, there's certain vehicles I wouldn't want to drive. And for reasons of I wouldn't only exclusively want to drive a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, for instance. It wouldn't always be practical. So in this imaginary world where all cars of all kinds, you just pick one and you just hop in. Well, I have 3 car seats, for instance. Would all cars also have 3 car seats? Obviously not. So it wouldn't be practical. But then somebody uses the vehicle that has 3 and I can't seem to find one. That's where ownership becomes highly convenient. And where lack of ownership becomes extremely inconvenient in that regard. Or I need to make a trip to northern Canada. That's where not being able to find a vehicle with 4-wheel drive becomes extremely inconvenient. That's where ownership becomes very advantageous. But could there be such a model? Could there be such a model where there was a world of perfect cooperation? Where the things that you needed, because everything was equally shareable. Here's another way of looking at it. Hypothetically, if there was no ownership, although obviously I'm giving some reasons why that would be so horrible, and I'm sure there's countless reasons possibly on both sides. It would be advantageous for innovation to drastically accelerate. It would be advantageous for things to be much more equitable. For homes to be, pragmatically, there would be people that wanted to remain more private. Even in a world of perfect absence of ownership, there would possibly be people that wanted privacy. So therefore, homes and establishments would make sense for there to be cabins and stuff like that. But on the flip side, there would be yes, what's the incentive for somebody to build a supercar versus a regular car? The question of motivation would have to completely be a universal concept. Yes, it's a utopianistic idea. But perceive a world where everyone did things not out of obligation per se, but out of joyful duty. The problem is, there are people that are selfish. There are people that will inevitably break the rules in this model. So even if we lived in a world where food was universal, where housing was universal, where everything was universal, equal access to all people, there are aspects of impracticality, but because there are people that are selfish. People are the problem, not the systems. There is no perfect system because there are no perfect people. I'll repeat that. There are no perfect systems because there are no perfect people. Come up with as many ideas as you like, guys. Point your finger. Tell people that they have privilege. You're not angry at that person's privilege. You're really just hating yourself. And you have false belief. You think all people are basically good. That's where you went wrong. Once you realize that all people are not basically good, that people are not perfect, you will understand. It'll be simple. It'll make sense. You'll understand that there's no political or governmental system that will ever be perfect because people aren't perfect. You'll understand that privilege is hardly even a symptom. It's more of a state of being. It's just a thing that is describing another thing. It's not a symptom, really. It's not even a problem. It's just describing a nature of things. Categorical access, guys. Categorical access. The question is, it should be understood very simply as this. Are you prohibited? If you are literally prohibited, then this is a good conversation to have. Should you be prohibited from something? Well, if you're a 3-time DUI driver, should you be prohibited from driving? You call that sober privilege. You have the privilege to drive because you're a sober person and you drive sober. Is that privilege? Is your prohibition because you're in the minority of alcoholics that like to drive and drink and drive? Is that prohibition good or bad? Okay. What about your blood type or your DNA or something that you have no power or control over? like I've discussed. One of my very first videos, guys. Go back and watch it. Blonde privilege. You have no control over that, except you kind of do because you can change your hair color, but that's not the point. The point is, what about when people are prohibited from doing things because of something that they do not have control over? And then, as a means of revenge, the minority creates a system in which they perpetuate the thing that they hate by causing other people to be judged and penalized based on things that they cannot change. The hate just keeps on going. It's fighting fire with fire. If you don't like the fire, why would you fight fire with fire? Except out of pure hatred. And if hatred is the motivation for your life, how's that working for you? If you don't know what I'm talking about, just think about a minority group claiming that they don't have access, or any categorical group. It doesn't have to be a minority. It's just the easiest to understand and identify right off, because whatever. But any group of people that claims to not have access to a thing or to stuff by nature of them belonging to a certain category, that same people group have orchestrated a system by which the opposing or hypothetical opposition is now being judged and prevented from stuff by nature of belonging to a category. It is like a war. It is like a competition. But it just keeps going over and over again. And it goes back to the question of, how do you get stuff? How do you get stuff in our reality? And if you think that there's a better reality, do something about it. If you think that there's a better way, prove it. But it's all about stuff. Stuff we need, stuff we want, stuff. What is your right to stuff? And how do you gain access if it is your right? In our reality, in any reality, think about that. Because it's a very important question. It is the first question, I would say. There is stuff. We need stuff and we want stuff. There is stuff that we need and there is stuff that we want. What is your right to stuff, any stuff? And if you have, hypothetically, no right to any stuff, there is no right within you for any categorical existence. Even as a human, you have no right to any stuff. Then you have to ask, how do I get this stuff? Hypothetically, if you have no right to stuff, you have no privilege to stuff, but you need access to stuff, the question is, how do you gain access to stuff? And is that tolerable? Is it sufficient? Rights. They call them human rights. And people just agree upon them. Why? Why do humans have any rights? Have you asked that question? Have you thought about the answer? What makes humans special that they have any rights at all? Do they have rights because they want them? Do they have rights because they need them? Why are rights a thing? Do we need them? For as much as people love autonomy, it's kind of interesting how folks that so desire autonomy at the core of their existence also advocate for rights. If you've never thought about any of this, you should have probably not been yelling so loud. You probably shouldn't have been arguing with such arrogance, because you might not know what you're talking about. I only came up with a couple examples because, yes, it got tangential. It got deeper, necessarily so. We'll come back another time and we'll talk about rights. We'll break it down. Break it down in an Aristotle-like fashion. All right.